questions. And there's a lot of things DCFS does for takes people, and I just like to kind of tell you why we do what we do and how you guys can help us be more productive. So if you have questions or comments, don't wait till the end. Feel free to jump in. I'm sure if you have questions, other people do too. So, okay, go ahead, Kevin. I'm just going to kind of start at the beginning. So DCFS has units for pretty much everything. You know, we have a mental health unit, we have a a financial unit, we have a legal unit, but the types of workers that are in the field, there's really like 4 types that you guys will probably be running into. So first one is the hotline. People call it the hotline worker, the SCR worker, call floor worker. They're ones that actually like you call when you call the hotline. They're the ones that takes the report. There's the investigators who perform the investigation. There's the permanency workers. Some people call them workers. Those are the ones with when the kids come into care, we do like the follow-up work. And there is intact, which is where there's not enough to remove child from the home, but they still send a worker in to provide services, trying to help the family. I also did not introduce myself. So I'm Tiffany Gula. When Kevin and I started this, I used to be an intact worker, or I'm sorry, an investigator when we started. And then I've also done permanency casework, and I'm a supervisor now, but I still just do this, even though it's called Ask the Investigator. I'm not an investigator anymore, but I seem to know it. So, okay, I'm ready. So everybody on here, mandated reporters. I know there's mandated reporting training, but some of it gets confusing. So as a mandated reporter, the main thing we want to get across is that you have reasonable cause to believe that a child known to you, either in your professional or official capacity, may be abused or neglected. A lot of people, I'm a mandated reporter, I have to call everything in. The issue is, DCFS doesn't have mandated reporter police who come out and say, did you call this in? It's people who willfully fail to report suspected abuse or neglect. I think I tell this story probably every year. It's a good example. My dad is a teacher, and he called me one day and he was like, the principal, and I think we need to call this into the hotline. Is this a hotline call? And I said, well, what happened? And he said that a kid had a big scratch on her face. And I said, well, what the kid say? And said, a dog jumped up and scratched her on the face. And I said, well, does it look like a dog scratch? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, possible? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, you don't need to call that in. Stuff happens, right? But it's, if you think abuse and neglect is happening. So try to think of an example. Like if the kid came to my dad and said, I got in trouble last night. Mom threw me in the dog pen and I got scratched on the face. Obviously that's like abuse or neglect. So just your own judgment. Stuff happens to kids, but it's if you really fail. So if like they said, mom threw me in the dog pen because I was bad last night, and you're like, oh, mom's stressed out, that's like willfully failing to report it. So that's where the issue comes in, not that you have to call every little thing in. So I always tell everybody on this, if you have any questions, you can always email me, you can call me, we can kind of walk through it, or you can just call on the hotline. I'll tell you whether or not it is a report that they can take. So another thing is when 2 or more people at a workplace, like if a kid talks to 2 teachers, a lot of times they say, well, we're both mandated reporters, we have to call it in. But really only one person needs to call that in. And so if they call it in, the floor call worker or the hotline worker should say, is there anybody else that has any information? And it can be like, yeah, the kid also talked to the science teacher. And so they'll put them down, report. It's like they have this little report that we get, that we print out in a OPWI, and it'll have that name on it. And so that stands for other person with information. And so investigator should call you as the reporter, and then the OPWI also. So, if a bunch of people know about the same incident, you don't need to all call in, just one person is fine. And then if any of you have called a hotline in before, they sent you a form, it's called the CANTS 5, and it just has like your name and what you saw and what the kid said, how you know the kid. If you're a mandated reporter, the hotline will send that to you and ask you to fill it out. Investigators really like if you can fill that out because that is admissible in any kind of judicial proceedings, can use that as evidence if they need to. So if you can take a few minutes to fill that out, it does help out a lot. And then obviously there's free mandated reporter training on the DCFS website if anybody has any questions. So any questions? If not, we can move on. No.
Paula, did you have something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
is the CANS form available online?
That's a good question. Some forms are and some are not. I don't know,
Tiffany.
to be honest with you, but yeah.
Yes, it is.
Is it okay? Good.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay.
Lindsay, that's the DCFS website.
Yes, because at the hotline now, just to go under the DCFS website and fill out the CANS 5.
Oh, so they don't send it anymore? Lindsay is
No.
on my team. She's a placement worker and she thought she was going to leave me so she left to go to the hotline and came back. So she knows. So, okay, well, that's old. Then they used to send you, but now I guess they just tell you to go online and fill it out. So that's good to know. Thank you, Lindsay.
I didn't know that I had a folder of those copied, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
So awesome.
Yeah, I never knew that either.
Awesome. Next slide.
Yeah. So people get like frustrated with hotline calls. So now you can either call 1-800-25-ABUSE or you can go online and fill it out. I know at times the hotline is very backed up and they will ask if they can call you back. Some people like to do it online, some people like to call, whichever, it all goes to the same place. For a hotline, for the SCR worker, the hotline worker to take a call, there has to be 3 things. There has to be an incident, a victim, and a perpetrator. And so that doesn't mean that you have to have, the perpetrator's full name and date of birth and address necessarily. It helps if you do. But it needs to have those 3 things. So it can't just be, a kid has a dog scratch. It has to have a perpetrator perpetrating the abuse or neglect. And if you're missing one of those, they'll know, or they'll ask you to call back. And if you don't know, another thing is if you don't know, like a kid's, I don't know, uncle or something, you can just tell the hotline it's the kid's uncle, and they can, we have, DHS, we work with DHS, and we have a system where we can usually track people down. And then if they do take it, the information from the hotline will be taken. They will kind of write that little report that I talked about, and then they send it to the county office assignment. And so that's what we call our mailbox. So the hotline worker will type it up, send it to the county mailbox, and that's where it'll get assigned in the county. I'm ready. We'll ask about confidentiality. So it's all the information you give is confidential. You can remain anonymous. It helps a lot if you give us your phone number, because you can kind of help us navigate this investigation. There are 5 categories that can have name as the reporter. It's DCFS, obviously, law enforcement, physician owners, medical examiners. Sometimes outside of those 5, out-of-state protection agencies. So like if a family flees to Missouri and they call us and they want the report, they are privy to your name. But really, it's just people that may need additional information. They have your name. As far as case members, kids, all of that should always remain confidential. And we tell parents, we can't tell you who called this in, but this is about. Sometimes parents can put it together. But at the end of the day, you're mandated to reporter. That's what we expect you to do. So, okay, I'm ready. So there's outcomes with hotlines. It gets kind of confusing, so I kind of like to touch on these briefly. The hotline worker may not take the hotline call. Again, you may not have a perpetrator. You may not have an incident that constitutes an investigation. They'll tell you whether or not they're going to take it. The second is a CWS referral, which we'll talk about more in a minute. The third is an investigation that can be created, or there's information. So information only is like if somebody on my team has an open case or there's already an investigation and it doesn't constitute like a new allegation, they'll just send us email and they will say, hey, this is information only. Just kind of like an FI. Then whatever assigned worker will go out, kind of talk about it, and if we think it's an investigation, we can call the hotline and say, can you make this an investigation? Oh, sorry, chat just popped up for me. So if a report is not taken, if you're a mandated reporter, you call the hotline and they say that it's not taken, there has to be supervisor approved. I always like to tell you guys, if you feel like you want like a second opinion or more explanation, you can always ask to talk to the supervisor, and they can kind of explain. You can talk to see if they want to take it. And again, if the call is taken, the county office will be notified, and that supervisor will assign the investigation to a worker. So, investigator. Okay, I'm ready, Kim.
Tiffany, quick question before I put
Yep.
this down. Steve from ROE3 just asked the date on for the perpetrator's birth date. That's not required online anymore, I don't think, is it? Like you had to fill out.
don't, oh, sorry. No, there's a lot of times we don't have the perpetrator birthday. I mean, Lindsay, you were at the hotline. Can they just put like 11111 or, you know, like what would happen?
That's been a year now, and I did and I can't remember a lot of it. When I did do them, it was all unknown.
Yeah, I think you can just put like just ones, try that. If not, I can definitely find that answer out for you, Kevin, if you want to email everybody. But there's a lot of reports that I would get that did not have the perpetrator's birthday. So if they were required, that's weird that they changed that.
When last I reported, I thought I remembered being able to jump over that and it not requiring it. Tiffany,
Yeah.
one more question I got yesterday about this particular slide. When you get new info, when you get a report taken and you get new info, do we call the hotline to add additional info or call the office and talk to the investigator directly?
Probably the best would be to call the hotline, only because, I mean, you could call, so let's say there's a call for environmental neglect, right? And so we have an open investigation, and then you think the kid comes to school and says there's a domestic violence incident. The answer I would probably give is probably call the hotline, because there may be a perpetrator. They may need to open it under somebody and they can't. So SCR can just add allegation onto that investigation if they need to, or they can open up a whole nother investigation. So it's probably would be easier to just call the hotline and they can kind of figure out how to navigate through that. Okay. Like if the investigator is, at your school and the kid had just do something, when you haven't had a chance to call the hotline, you can tell the investigator. They may tell you to call the hotline, but they can also sit in. It's just SCR has the ability to make new reports if they need to.
Got it. All right. Thank you very much.
That was kind of a long answer for that. I would say call the hotline unless you're in, close contact with the investigator. Probably call the hotline.
Perfect. Thank you.
So a CWS referral, I still say these are new, but they're really not new. They've been around for a few years. Essentially, when there's not enough to like warrant an investigation, a CWS referral can be made, or a family can call and request a CWS be open. So it's mandated reporters. If you guys call a situation that doesn't qualify for the investigation, but there are circumstances that like indicate a service need they has, they can open a CWS referral. So that's not going to be an investigation. Going to be the kids can't be removed from the home. It's depending on your county who goes out, like in Macoupin County and Montgomery County. It used to be Our field office would rotate the CWS referrals, but now there is a contracted agency called Horse up in Jacksonville. And so they'll come and cover the county. And so that worker will just come out. Let's say it's like that you think might have, let's say you call the hotline and you say, you know, the kid said she's scared of dad, or mom's scared of dad or something. And you think it's violence, but there's not really an incident to take a hotline. The CWS referral have that hobby horse worker go out and kind of talk to mom and say, is there domestic violence? Do you need help getting an OP? Sometimes those can result in an investigation, but most of the time it's just kind of a service need. If they need help with counseling, if they need help with housing, you know, if they have a kid who's not listening, need a family counselor or whatever, it just kind of links them up with these resources. So the people that can request a CWS referral is like the adult subject, so like a mom or a dad, other people residing in the subject's home, or a mandated porter. Sometimes they'll take it if a kid requests it, just kind of depends on the circumstance. So there's a lot of times, like Kevin, when you call and say, you know, family needs help, I say, well, have mom call and ask for a CWS referral. And you can tell the parents, this is not an open DCFS case. This is not an investigation. This does not go through court. Literally, it's just like a community resource to come out and kind of help link you up, whatever you need help doing. So parents are scared to call though. Do families have to be informed or requested a CWS referral? No, they don't. Oops. Let me go up. So the families don't have to be informed, but the tricky thing with the CWS is, you know, I always encourage you to like talk to the mom and say, just kind of like ease their anxiety about, you know, nobody likes DCFS at their doorstep, right? And say, this is a voluntary program. It's not even really DCFS. It's probably going to be hobbyists in this area. Because if a hobby horse worker goes out and says, can I see the kids? Can I help you with this? They can tell us to go jump in a lake and we have to jump, you know, we have to close it out. So they have to agree to even let us talk to them or talk to the kids or anything. So really, if you can get them on board, it's a lot easier to engage them. But the short answer is no, you don't have to inform them that you did that. Did that answer your question, Savannah? And okay. And then the second one, are we allowed to get the results of a call we made? I made an online report once. An investigator called me and said they were sending an investigator out, and I asked if they could let me know what to find out, but I don't know if they removed. The caseworker said she cannot do that. However, another student files, I have caseworker's name and number to communicate with frequently. Yes, actually, I have that later on. That's a common question, Tiffany. And the short answer is yes, but there's a whole slide on that. So if you just wait a second, I think it'll answer your question. What are the response times for DCFS to contact hotline versus WS? So that's a good question, Kathy. So if there's an investigation, the investigator has to see the child within 20 hours. There's a few caveats to that, which we'll talk about in a minute. A CWS call, the CWS worker has to go out within 5 working days. So if you call on a Monday, typically they try to go out as fast as they can. They may try to call mom a lot. We'll try to call them beforehand to make sure they're home, make sure that they're open to us coming. We like to give them a heads up, you know, like, hey, this is investigation, can you answer your door? But it may not be for 5 days before they actually contact. And if I'm not answering your question, let me know. Let me see. Becky says, regarding confidentiality, this week an investigator told the family the agency social worker made a hotline report. The social worker was told that as a mandated report, DCFS does not have to preserve an update. Could you clarify? Becky, can you give me the example? Maybe I can understand it a little bit more. Oh, Becky,
Sorry, I was struggling with my mute
button.
button.
I was like, well, maybe my microphone's not working.
So this is a social worker that comes into a school from an agency. and she made a hotline report, and then the family started calling her for making the report. And obviously, like, families can sometimes guess where the report came from, but the investigator confirmed, my understanding is the investigator confirmed, like, because you're a mandated reporter, we don't have to keep that anonymous from the family. They have a right to know.
Yeah, that's not true.
Right.
So if you can, my email's at the end of the, email me who that was. Again, you know, I feel like, you know, the number one thing to push is, you know, we have to keep this anonymous because, well, it's nerve-wracking to call the hotline, right? So families can put it, but even if a mom's like, you know, I know it was Becky that called, we should never like confirm or deny. We're just saying, you know, this isn't the point of, we're not investigating who called, we're investigating this hotline here. So I can definitely talk to that supervisor, make sure sometimes, I mean, I'd like to say 100% everybody's confidential. Sometimes we, you know, investigators may be new, or they may have heard something that's not correct. So again, this is why I like doing this. So if there are investigators, you know, going around saying this, they might not just know that they shouldn't be doing that. And so I like to get feedback from you guys. I will definitely talk to that supervisor and to make sure their whole team knows who that was. Do you know the name of him, Becky?
I don't know offhand, but I can get it.
Or even what county it is? What is it, Macoupin?
No, Madison.
Okay. Yeah, I'll probably just send an email to the surrounding counties to the supervisors and just ask.
Yeah, I'll get your email at the end, and I'll ask the person who this impacted. I'll ask her to give you an email.
Okay. And Becky, that's a good thing. Sometimes people get confused, like, why Madison is area. So the investigation gets assigned to whatever county child lives in. So, you know, if mom and dad are split up and mom lives in Madison and dad lives in Macoupin, the investigation is going to be in Madison. So we call it a primary investigator is going to be in Madison. But like if the kid is in Macoupin visiting, investigators don't cross the lines. And so a Macoupin worker may come to the school to talk to the kid, and we call it parallel. So it gets kind of confusing if it's different counties, but it's whatever county is living in is where it's assigned. And then there could be like courtesy parallel workers that kind of do things in other ways for the investigator. So sometimes you'll kind of come across teams that not who we usually deal with. So yeah, email that to me. And like I said, it should always be confidential. And if you guys ever know of somebody not preserving that, let me know, email me. So, is there any other questions I'm missing? I think that's it. So, and if you have questions like about CWS referrals, you know, if you know Kevin, he can text with me, or you can email me, or you can even call the hotline and ask questions too. So, I think I'm done with this slide. So there's nothing else. Okay. I just minimized the chat, so if there's more questions, let me know. Okay, so we have an investigation. Let's say the hotline takes an investigation. So system, and there's numbers on each allegation. So we have allegations for, you know, environmental neglect, head injuries, cuts, welts, bruises, you know, medical neglect, and whatever the hotline codes the allegation. When we get this, we call it an intake. It has, you know, allegation 82, and it has the victims and the perps. That's what we go investigate. So DCFS is to see the child within 24 hours of the report. 24 hours is standard. If it's something, you know, a kid's home alone, we have response codes like emergency and action needed. So emergency or an action needed, it's within an hour or 2 hours, but typically just a standard report, they have to see the child within 24 hours. Another thing that gets confusing is, so when there's an open investigation and a child is listed on that investigation, like consent and HIPAA, none of that is, like, investigators don't have to get a parent's consent. They can come talk to a kid at school. As long as there's an open investigation, they don't need parents' consent. They can get medical records, anything that they need that's relevant to that investigation. So the investigator should call the report and kind of inquire about what you called in. And then they have 60 days to complete an investigation. And they will spend that time kind of talking to teachers, police, anybody else. As the reporter, if you know the kid has a close friendship with, another teacher, or who they go to the doctor, any information you can give, be sure to give the investigator. And then, like I said, they have 60 days to kind of put all this together to decide whether or not they're going to indicate the parents. So I have that it may be extended sometimes. The investigation will be put into an extend, and that's like if they're waiting, if it goes hand in hand, like if we're working with the police are waiting for like criminal charges or something, we may extend the investigation because we like to come out around the same time. The investigator should contact you as the reporter to discuss the findings. And if they don't, you can always call the investigator back around day 60 just to get kind of filled in. Sometimes, they'll close it up and they'll forget to call you. You should get a letter as a reporter saying what the outcome was, but always feel free to call the investigator if you need to. And again, if it's kind of like what Kevin said, if there's new information that comes up, it's not necessarily like a new allegation, just, hey, the kid, something minor, feel call the investigator throughout the investigation too, if you need to. Another thing I like to do, people will get upset, they'll be like, I called the hotline, they took this investigation, and they can just like physically saw the kid and didn't even ask about what I reported. There's a lot of times that we will wait for the police. So we don't want a kid to have to be interviewed about the same traumatic experience 4 times. We want to make sure their credibility, when we go to court, if a kid changes a sentence, it kind of be out the window. So a lot of times, if it's going to be something that's also being criminally charged, or we have a CAC sometimes that we'll send a kid to, which is a like interview, we may wait, and especially with like sex abuse, we will not interview the kid at that point, but we will wait for the police, the state's attorney, us will all go to this CAC, and they will record the view, and then that way the kid only has to talk about it one time. So the kid will be interviewed. It may just not be within the 4 hours. I saw there was a chat, but I don't know where my chat went. Oh, here it is. It says, off topic, if a child is prescribed depression meds or ADHD meds and parents does not fill them, is that considered medical neglect? No. And we'll kind of get into this in a minute. The allegations are very specific. So medical neglect is very specific to if it's a life-altering medication. So diabetes medicine, things that will affect life or death, or affect a child's like body functioning, that is what medical neglect is. As I come from a family of teachers, and trust me, they complain all the time, this mom's not giving them ADHD meds, and the kid's crazy. It's not going to hurt them. It's not abuse or neglect. It's annoying. We can go out there and we'll do our best to be like, this really isn't doing anything for the kid. You need to make sure to give them the meds. Now, the caveat to that is, is mom selling the meds? There's little things that we can maybe get them if it's, or the kid has such severe ADHD, a doctor says, that the kid's going to hurt themselves if they don't take meds. Or, depression meds, maybe like if a doctor says this child has to have depression medication, because suicidal, reasons or whatever. A lot of times at that point, we'll rely on the doctor to write like an affidavit saying this is life or death, essentially, but it's very hard to do. So, okay, I think I'm done with this slide. So these are things that help us if you can kind of, talk to the investigator, how you know the people involved when you first met them. Like I said, we get this printout, this intake printout, and sometimes the hotline worker can miss some stuff or they can get things wrong. So even though you've already told the hotline worker, we don't ever talk to the hotline worker. So when the investigator calls you, just kind of do a brief of what you said, make sure they have the information right. Any new information since you called the hotline, anybody that, like I said, we can contact to help, help this case, family strengths, any supports, any safety, if there's like 4 pit bulls that attacked somebody yesterday, please let us know so we don't go out there, or if dad's very hostile and has yelled at secretary, just let us know those things. And then anything else, if the investigator didn't, be sure to tell them as much information, that you have. Okay, I'm ready for the next slide. So in investigation, there's different outcomes, and we can kind of talk about this more in depth, but there's unfounded, which means there's no evidence to substantiate the allegation, so it's unfounded, investigation's closed. There's indicated, but the kids still stay in the home, which we'll talk about that in a minute. There's intact services. A lot of times that is from an indicated report, but we don't have what we need to remove the kid. So we'll put an intact worker in. Again, like, if there's domestic violence and mom goes and gets an OP, right? And she gets this OP against dad. There's really nothing saying that kid's not at risk at this point, but we'll put an intact worker in just to make sure that mom's abiding by this, this OP, make sure that she doesn't with counseling or anything. Intact is usually about 6 months, just short-term support. And then protective custody is when there is urgent and immediate, and we actually take the kid into state custody and open up a placement case. Is intact voluntary? Intact, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. Intact is voluntary, but it'll be court ordered. So some families have voluntary intact, some are ordered to do that. But we'll get to that in 1 second. Okay. Yep. Okay, Kevin. Slide.
Tiffany, there's one more question on that.
Yep.
Is there a different form for mandated reporters to fill out online versus a non-mandated reporter, or is it all the same?
It should be all the same. It'll ask for a mandated reporter on it, but it should be the same form.
Thank you.
Okay, so probably like the biggest thing to explain to me about, and probably everybody in DCFS, is unfounded reports. Super confusing. I've been doing this 18 years. I still get confused about stuff. So the thing is, we have to have evidence that a minor is at risk of harm due to the caretaker's action or lack of actions to keep the kids safe. So I'll go into that if you want to go to the next slide. So I always like environmental neglect is a huge complaint we get. Minimum parenting standards, the key word is, right? So it's very minimum. There's a lot of minimum parenting standards that you guys wouldn't want, you would not consider to even be adequate, but the state law, we have to do minimum. What is minimum? A home does not have to have running water, but they have to have access to water. So, I had a home once that they lived next door to grandma and grandpa. The kids were on a schedule. They'd go to grandma and grandpa's house to take showers every night. They had gallons of water to drink. They had gallons of water to brush their teeth. They had gallons of water to flush a toilet. You don't have to have electricity. But if you don't have electricity and I think it's 54 degrees, the house gets under 54 degrees, they need to take the kids somewhere else. So minimum parenting is very minimum, but there also has to be like these safety, you know, plans in place. If the house gets too cold, do they have somewhere to go? We can't take kids based on poverty. So if, you know, parents have heat because they can't afford it, that's not reason that we can take kids. We can take the kids if we say, you know, grandma lives across the street and says you guys can go stay there, and parents say, I hate my mom, my kids aren't going to go stay with her. Then at that point it starts to get, you know, blatant guard of them making the kids stay in a cold house. But for the most part, we need to work with them to try to figure out a plan for them to meet this minimum parenting standards. So we have this, it's allegation system, right? And every allegation has a definition. So this is the child's person, clothing, living conditions are unsanitary to the point, likelihood of harm to the child's health, well-being, or welfare. So it can include like infestation of rodents, spiders, insects, snakes, feces, spoiled food, garbage. But again, there's catch to that, which we'll talk about on the next slide. You want to go to that. So on this allegation system, we also have required documentation. So for an investigator to indicate environmental neglect, they're going to have to document through observation photographs that the child's like clothing or living condition is so unsanitary that it's going to cause harm to the child. There's have to be like specific documentation of how the house is posing this risk harm. So on the next slide, I can tell you how we do that. So things that we have to consider are the child's age, developmental stage, any physical condition, severity, pattern of this. So like in order to prove that these conditions pose a risk, we have to kind of through these factors and like write them out in our allegation system. So if there's feces, if there's dog feces all over the floor, obviously it's going to be much more of a risk for a 2-year-old, because a 2-year-old, you know, can eat it, get it on their body, whatever, versus a 13-year-old, even though, you know, you and I may say this is like completely unacceptable. Your dog goes to the bathroom, clean up your dog mess. A 13-year-old is viewed that they're old enough that they can also clean it up. So again, it's not stuff I necessarily agree with, but it's what's the child's developmental capabilities. The child know not to eat the species. You know, if there's spoiled food, does the child know not to eat the spoiled food? So, sorry, my throat is dry. You know, a pattern. A lot of times, if let's say like a home had an intact case, and we've been in this home place, and we're like, you have got to clean these fire escapes. You know, you have got to clean these doorways, whatever. And it just keeps getting to where it's like not working and getting worse. Kids based on like, we have to do reasonable efforts, right? So we have to work with them. We have to try to get them to this house. And if they are just refusing to maintain it, sometimes we can take based on that. Okay, next slide. Other things about unfounded reports that irritate a lot of people. So we're not the police. And so just because something's illegal doesn't mean a child's being abused or neglected. As crazy as it sounds, if a kid is at grandma's house for the weekend and parents are using meth, that's a police issue. That's not child abuse or neglect. You know, domestic violence, you know, dad's hurt mom and the kids are at school. The kid isn't at risk of being harmed. So again, that's police that need to charge dad with assault. So it gets very confusing. And again, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but it has to be at risk. We have to have that immediate risk to take the kid in custody. We have to have evidence of the child at harm to indicate. The other thing is a lot of people say, you know, why is dad indicated, but he's not in jail? Oh, can you go back real quick, Kevin? The police have a higher burden of proof than we do. So like our preponderance of evidence is that we have to have a finding that more than likely than not happened. So, you know, mom has a bruise on her face, the kids say, you know, dad hit mom in the face. A reasonable person, more likely than not, that's what happened. But the police often have a higher burden of proof to press criminal charges. Then they have to take it to the state's attorney. The state's attorney has to agree to do these charges. So a lot of times we could Kate, but dad's not arrested. You know, same with drugs. It's two different ponderance of evidences, which gets confusing for people, but it's a lot easier for DCFS to indicate than it is for police to press charges. So anybody have any questions about that? It's very frustrating for people.
Tiffany,
No.
Brianne put a question in the chat earlier about the CANTS 5. Do you have a slide about that later, or do you want to ask about that now?
No, let me see. I have a question about what is written on the CANTS 5 form. I can wait if there's a slide. There's no slide about the CANTS 5 form. Really what helps, like what the child said, like quotes, dad hit mom. You know, anything we can take into court says this is literally what the child said. This is what the teacher, you know, said the child said. And you observed like, a bruise approximately the size of a mortar on, you know, the child's right cheek, you know, just little, you don't really have to do like a whole story, just like facts about the case that we can use, just of what we've observed, what you've been told.
Okay, because
That
sorry, I
makes sense.
muted. Because so yeah, hearing you say earlier in the presentation that this is what's admissible. I think I've always approached the CANTS 5 as they already took my report, and there's not a space for each question, so I tend to write very little.
Yeah, you're like, see back of page. Yeah, see back page.
Hearing you say this now is making me reconsider how I write on this form.
So yeah, so the thing is, like, there's certain court hearings that can have hearsay, certain court hearings can't. Certain witnesses, you know, it's hard, like if they're like, you know, Brianne, if I go in and I'm like, Brianne, I can't go into court at this point, you know, if there's an open case and this, because for me to say that in court, the defense has to have a chance to cross-examine, right? So I can't bring anything into court without defending the client. So really anything you say, I can't bring into court without you being in court, if that makes sense. So the CANTS 5 is something that we can put in without need cross-examination. So it can be very valuable if we need it. And that's why it's like, don't put your opinion in it. Don't put, you know, you can put things like child has been falling asleep in class. You know, you can also talk to the investigator, you know, is this important for me to put in the CANTS 5? You know, but like I said, injuries you observe, definitely important. Quotes from the kid, very good to have. You know, just stay away from opinions is pretty much what it is. But if you need more room, you can ask the investigator if you can verbally tell them. A lot of times, very rarely do they need to use a CANTS 5 because they use your verbal report. They'll type a note up and they can use that in the first hearing. So a lot of times, like verbal, if you tell them verbally, they don't necessarily need it on the CANTS 5. You can always ask them, do you want me to do another CANTS 5 or something? And they'd let you know. That's a good question.
They can use, like, whatever I typed online, or because I tend to look at the CANTS 5 and I'm like, well, okay, I said all of this detail on the call or on the online report. I'm going to try and just summarize what fits.
Yeah, no, that's an extremely good point. My workers hear me say this all the time. We cannot use anything that's on from when you call the hotline. We can say why the hotline call was called, but at the end of the day, I can call child abuse on Hillary Clinton if I wanted to. You know what I mean? Like, it's an allegation. So whenever you actually talk to the investigator, they'll document what you said, and that can be used. It's because at that point, not an allegation of what happened anymore. It's a collateral giving you information on an investigation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is helpful.
Yeah.
I have one more question on this too.
Yeah.
We have always debated. So at the top right under where it's for the child's name and parent's name and address, it says, this is to confirm my oral report blank, comma, blank, made in accordance. We never know what to write on those two lines.
Let me see. Let me try to pull that up. Let me get back to that. Remind me at the end to cancel and look at it, because
Thank you.
that's, yeah, but I'll probably forget. So remind me to do that before I get off.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no more questions for the next slide. Okay, so an intact case, again, we kind of went over this. This is when something's indicated, typically when it's indicated, services are recommended. So again, domestic violence, you know, we come in, a kid says, you know, we find out there's domestic violence in a home, mom moves out, gets an OP, kid's not at risk anymore. We're going to put preventative services in. We're going to say, you know, why don't you get some counseling? Why don't we need you to understand the cycle of violence? We need the kids to get counseling, whatever. We kind of just make sure that they're keeping up with it. This can be voluntary, it can be court ordered. Some parents will call and say, can I have an intact case? I need some help. Mostly intact is voluntary. I would say maybe very rarely will courts order intact. Does happen. You may hear rules of supervision, a CUS order intact, that the court will lay out certain things, like mom has to abide by the OP, mom has to get counseling, mom has to ensure the kids don't have contact with dad, whatever. If that gets violated, then DCFS can go in and remove the kids if we need to. So an worker's assigned, usually intact, we'll see the family weekly, short term, 6 months, and they will just, the whole point of intact is to prevent kids from coming into care. When we take kids into care, we have to talk about reasonable efforts. What have we done to prevent these kids coming in care? If mom violates this OP and lets dad back in the house, another domestic incident happens, we can say, you know, we've had intact, she's not doing it, or you know, we've got services in to help clean the house, you know, and they're not doing it. So as we make efforts to fix it and they're not doing it, then we can take the kids. Oh, Lindsay said, I can answer a Can't Survive question. It's a typo, and the hotline worker should inform each caller typo. Okay, so she's saying that the hotline worker should tell you that that line up top is a typo.
It should say on and not if. Or
It should,
whatever exact. I had it up and now I can't pull it back.
oh,
So
like the date? It's
yeah.
like it's the date.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Lindsay. I mean, it'd probably just be easier to change the form online so people don't get confused, but okay, next. I'm ready for the next slide. So we take protective custody. That's whenever we take the kids into state care. We remove them from parents when there's urgent and immediate risk, if they stay in the situation they're in. The Illinois investigators, police officers, and physicians are the only people with authority to take PC. Again, that is if they believe that there's a neglected, they're at substantial risk of injury. It's like immediate, like if we don't remove this kid, it's, you know, they're at risk. Protective custody is valid for 48 hours when the courthouse is open, essentially. Weekends and holidays don't count. And then they'll have a court hearing, which is shelter care, and the judge will decide if immediate risks. And then we always try to identify family or fictive kin to care for the child. So after we take PC, nope, go ahead. I'm ready for the next slide. After we take PC, a few things, we'll try to keep the kiddos in like the same location as much as we can. I don't know if any of you, like in schools, is there anybody at school that can be fictive kin? Back in the day, you had to be related to have a kid. Sometimes we would, you know, we could say people were godparents or something, but now there's fictive kin. So if a kid has a good relationship with a teacher, you know, the investigator should ask the kid, do you feel safe? You know, anybody you feel safe with? And if, you know, the teacher's like, yeah, we can foster this kid, you know, we would love it. Relatives do get first choice. I mean, not choice, but we always have to go with relatives first. If there's no viable relatives, you know, we do background checks. We make sure parents aren't living in the home, things like that. Then we can move to fictive. If there's no fictive kin, then we just move to a traditional home. You know, we don't have very many homes, so sometimes the kids may need to move out of the district and out of school. Court will be within 48 hours to determine if evidence warrants the removal of the kiddo. And then at that point, that's when the permanency worker, caseworker, they'll be assigned. They stay with the case until pretty much the end, until the kid's returned home or the kid's adopted. They'll make a service plan for the parents. You know, the service plan does not have, you know, a gold retriever and a white picket fence, but it's that whatever concerns the kids came and cared, those need to be rectified. And then throughout the case, you know, the caseworker should be in contact with teachers and counselors and any other professionals throughout the case. You know, if you have questions, like we can't necessarily say, you know, if mom or dad are doing their services, but we can say, you know, how the kid's doing, or if you have concerns about a kid, especially if they're in care, let us know for sure. Teachers are a huge help for purposes. So, okay, I know I'm kind of going over, we're almost done. Okay, I'm ready for the next slide.
You want educational neglect, Tiffany, or you want the
Nope,
next one?
go ahead. Yep, I'm ready for the next one.
This one's good, okay.
Blatant disregard is really a key term we use. So it's blatant disregard is, you know, we use the word a reasonable person. And so if a reasonable person, you know, would not expose a child to this danger without taking precautionary measures, you know, that's what's considered blatant disregard. So example is a home daycare provider with a pool on their property, and they don't have adequate supervision. So, you know, if or they don't take precautions. So like if, you know, a daycare lady has 2-year-olds that like to run out of the door, and she doesn't have a lock on the door and the kid can go into the pool, you know, that's blatant. A reasonable person would say you need to lock your door, right? So reasonable person is the term we abide by a lot. Okay, I'm ready for the next slide. So I think this is the last slide, like ways you can help. I keep records or advise people who have information. I use this example a lot. One time there was a kid that had teeth rotting out of her mouth. Again, it's like a reasonable person would take this child to the dentist. I didn't end up winning. I couldn't indicate this because no professional had told the parents to take the child to the dentist. Even though the school nurse said, you know, we have this dental clinic, she didn't have any documentation of that. So any documentation you have is great. You know, if you have a concern with parents.
Who is that? Oh, Savannah and Kathy had to leave, and I have to leave.
Okay. If you know, have conversations with parents trying to like offer them help, just if you can document it or the nurse can document it. Examples, you know, records of small changes, they may not seem like a lot, but like falling asleep in class, grade changes, behavior changes. You know, one case I had, the teacher and I worked really close together. An uncle had moved, I think I said this last year, but an uncle had moved into the home. She was being sexually abused. The teacher and I were able to look at her records and document that she started falling asleep in class. She started having behavior changes in class. Her grades were failing, and it was all pretty close to the same time the uncle moved in. And we were able to kind of, you know, use that as a timeline. And we ended up winning in court because it was just it made sense, right? And then ask questions. So we like to educate the community. It makes our job easier. If there's things that we can do to help you guys, let us know. A lot of times we just get kind of busy, especially if we're taking protective custody, and we may forget to call the teacher or something. So if, you know, a kid's not showing up for 2 days, call call the local office and say, hey, just checking in, making sure that the kid's okay. Oh yeah, sorry, we took protective custody. It's not that we're meaning to not inform you. It's a very busy 48 hours and sometimes we forget. So, okay. I think the next slide is just my name. And yeah, there's my email, Carlinville Field Office. That Carlinville covers Macoupin and Montgomery. But you can always email me if you have any questions. So Kevin always knows how to get a hold of me. If you feel more comfortable talking to Kevin, he can always contact me too. So any questions? Not too far off the hour limit.
I gave us till 4, Tiffany, just in case we needed.
Oh, okay. Yep. I thought it was still 3.
No, we got plenty of time just in the event we need. Folks, you are not going to find anyway. Again, I have been a school social worker for going on 20 years now, and I just learned about parallel workers last year. So Tiffany is a wealth of information. Any questions you got, please throw them out. Have loved the questions we've had, but I know there's more. Throw them out, folks. There's no bad questions.
No, like I said, I've been doing this 18 years and I still learn new things probably at least once a week. So it's like, oh, I didn't know that. So it's a very confusing process and it's a lot of information. So yeah, but even if you think of something later on, just let us know. No problem.
Any questions at the moment? Tiffany, you're good if I send the slideshow out?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect. I've got notes and stuff. And folks, I put in the chat, if you're new and want to join the email group, drop me your email. I know we've got some new people, and so put emails in there if you guys would like.
Well, thank you guys. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys listening to, I know DCFS frustrates a lot of everybody, so I appreciate you listening and willing to learn.
I'm not sure if can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're good, Ryan.
Okay. I just had a question, and you may not be able to answer this. I do mental health care. And, as a mental health provider, one of the things that I have some issues with DCFS is trying to get paperwork. Is there any guidance you can give us on obtaining paperwork? Like we need a treatment plan signatures, or just a yearly paperwork that we do, or release of information. It's sometimes difficult to obtain from the guardian. Is there?
Yeah. Yes, there is. Wait, so when a case comes, so whenever a kid is in state care, we have a guardian, his name's David L. Fox. And so he has authorized agents that can sign. So like I'm an authorized agent. So if you sent me something, I can sign for David Fox. The times it gets tricky is sometimes when a kid comes into care, they'll go to what we call private agencies. So you may have a caseworker from like Lutheran or Catholic Charities, Rutledge. Yeah. Right. So they don't have,
Village on.
And that's probably where you run into a lot of issues because they don't have authorized agents in their offices. And so what they have to do is they have to send it to the consent unit, and the consent unit can get backlogged a lot. I had some private workers email and say, can you sign this? Because, it's taking a long time to get it back. So that could be a problem. It could be the caseworker forgets to get it signed. There's a lot of million reasons why. At the end of the day, if there's something that is needed, you can always email me, or you can like email me with the worker, especially if it's a private worker, just do like a group email and say, the consent was sent, and it's backlogged. Can you sign this or whatever?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, not a problem. We can sign for private. I don't like to step on private's toes and be like, your counselor is complaining that you're not getting paperwork, but it is frustrating for you too. It's very frustrating. So if you need me to step in at any point, we can do that. Okay. I think every DCFS office should have at least an authorized agent. Typically the supervisors are an authorized agent. So even, if it's a DCFS office, so if it's a DCFS worker, you can always talk to their supervisor too if you need to, but feel free to email me if you have problems with it.
Thank you very much.
There's something in the chat says, Have a child claiming they were sexually abused by an older brother. DCFS is not going to do anything because he does not live with that brother anymore and visits were supervised. Is there a way to get visits discontinued without a verdict? Okay. So yeah, sex abuse is a tricky thing, especially to prove. So sex abuse, to indicate sex abuse, it has to be for an eligible perpetrator, it has to be somebody in the caretaking role, which can get kind of confusing. There's ways around to get a kid, but like essentially if I know this isn't your question, but there's a point to this. If like a kid is in a home and a cousin's coming over to the house, you know, and sexually abusing a child, we can't indicate that cousin because it's not a household member. They're not a caretaker. It's just those weird, you know, factors that we have to take in consideration. What we can do is, you know, reasonable efforts. We need to tell the parents about it. If parents are still letting this cousin come over, you know, and not taking precautions, we can indicate the parents for like inadequate supervision or neglect or something like that. Once a kid is in care, to stop visits, so visits are mandated by law, and to stop visits, a supervisor has to make a critical decision. And so, Jackie, are you like a mental health professional, or are you like a therapist or anything?
Actually, I'm a foster parent.
Okay.
And I'm a parent educator, so.
Okay. What I advise you do in that situation is contact the GAL, maybe. Two ways we can stop visits is a critical decision by the supervisor, which is, you know, we have to have evidence that this is detrimental to the well-being. So I asked if you were a counselor because I depend on counselor reports a lot to make critical decisions. So if a counselor is saying this is not good, they're not ready, you know, this is triggering, I can stop visits based on that. The other way, you know, so if the kid isn't a counselor, seeing a counselor, reports from the counselor are huge. The other way is for court to order visits not happen. So those are the two ways to stop visits. So if you're not getting anywhere with the worker and supervisor, I would contact the GAL. Every kid in care has a GAL. It's a guardian ad litem. It's appointed by the county, and that's a lawyer who represents the child in court for their best interest. And so the GAL should be talking to the kids, talking to collaterals. They get busy too, but they're always open. They should be open to information. It's kind of hard to stop visits, but it's not impossible, especially if, you know, the kid is having issues with it. So did that answer your question? That was a long answer again.
Yes,
There's no
thank
short
you.
answer. There's no short answers with DCFS. How
No,
about that?
no, thank you. No, thank
Yeah.
you very much. I just wanted to make sure I was doing everything that I was supposed to try and get them stopped, so.
Yeah, a lot of times court, depending on the court, you know, every judge is different. There's counties that, you know, they think if the visits are supervised that, you know, there's no risk of harm to the kid, which is true, but, you know, mental well-being, and that's where we can pull in counselors a lot, or teachers if they're saying, you know, they're having behaviors after visits. Logbooks are really good. You know, if they're doing visits with this brother and their behaviors are really bad the next day or two, keeping a logbook of that really helps critical decisions. Just anything that can back up how this is detrimental to the kid is what we need for that. So, and if you have logbooks and stuff like that, for sure, tell the GAL because they can present those in court too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Can you sign as authorized in your own counties, or can you sign in other counties and private agencies? I can sign anywhere in the state, if they need it. So, because there's only one guardian for the whole state, and I'm authorized for him, so it doesn't matter the county or private agency. Not missing anything, am I? Anything else? Great. Kevin, you have anything?
think that's it. No, I got nothing. Much appreciated, Tiffany.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Absolutely. Thank you for presenting for us. Folks, we're going to meet again in March, and I will get that info out to you. And again, much appreciated. So happy to see everybody here today.